or at Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Practice Lead at Vanguard Communications. And we also have Joseph Green, who is an award-winning storyteller and Chief Executive Officer of LMS Voice. Now, at this time, I will ask Crystal and Joseph just to tell us a little bit about themselves and the work they do, starting off with Crystal, then we'll go to Joseph, then we'll come back and I will talk about the learning objectives and get into the rest of the webinar. Crystal?
Great. Thank you so much, Marian. And hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here and be a part of this conversation. So as Marian mentioned, I work at Vanguard Communications. We're a PR agency working for social change. So we work with government agencies like SAMHSA, as well as nonprofit organizations. And I spend a lot of my time working with individuals and organizations, helping them identify their stories and using those stories to create the change that they are striving to create. And so I've been doing communications for about 20 years now, and been at Vanguard for 17. And in all that time have especially been in this community of substance use prevention specialists and mental health promotion advocates. And so have a lot of experience, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joseph Green, and I have a lot in common with Crystal. I also am a professional storyteller who engages organizations and individuals to better use their stories, whether it be for advocacy, greater connection in community, or even at home. I started out in theater, moved to spoken word poetry, and realized a few years ago that I've been telling stories the whole time. And a lot of my successes in life, primarily being a person in long-term recovery, have benefited from my ability to express who I am and make connections with folks that have created a network of support for me. And I enjoy doing that same thing for other people. So I am here today to give you a little bit of how that works for me in our process, and to also learn from Crystal and from your questions. So please ask lots of questions, and I can't wait to get started.
Great. Thanks, Crystal and Joseph. And Joseph, it's not by coincidence that there's some overlap or some similarities. That was done somewhat by design. But it is by no coincidence that our audience joined us. And for those who are joining us for this webinar, thank you for joining. We know that you have other things on your agenda, but you found it important to join us for this conversation. So at this point, I will talk about the learning objectives. So in this discussion, we hope you'll learn more about why storytelling is an important tool to showcase your prevention efforts in communities, talks, events, and activities. Also, for you to identify, cultivate, and support powerful prevention stories within your organization and community that disrupt the existing narrative about substance use prevention. And also to understand how to craft engaging prevention stories that are respectful, inclusive, and equitable. So what is Communities Talk? Communities Talk is a SAMHSA-sponsored program to support community-based organizations to hold prevention efforts and activities. These include colleges and universities, state-based organizations, as well as local chapters of national organizations. Communities Talk events educate communities about harmful consequences of underage drinking and other substance use among people ages 12 to 25. And they also help communities mobilize to put evidence-based prevention strategies in place. So since Communities Talk began, it has supported thousands of local organizations' prevention events. In 2023, there were 500 stipends of $750 distributed on a first come, first served basis. Communities Talk has now evolved and now takes place every year, with the next cycle beginning in January of 2024. And we hope that this change will help communities to carry the momentum in their prevention efforts from year to year. We also encourage organizations to continue their prevention work, even if they do not receive a stipend. Next slide, please. So of course, we want you to participate in Communities Talk 2024. A registration for the 2024 cycle of Communities Talk begins in January. So to participate, request your invitation from info@stopalcoholabuse.net. Once invited, you'll need to complete an online registration form. There you'll learn more about registering and planning your event, and you can visit stopalcoholabuse.gov/communities talk. And there you can feature your activity on the Find an Activity map. Make sure that you update the activities, excuse me, in your Communities Talk profile. And also keep an eye out for an invitation to share your Communities Talk success stories. Your success story, your story could be featured on the Communities Talk website. So how does the Disrupting the Narrative Storytelling support Communities Talk's goals? As we know, the goal of Communities Talk is to educate communities about alcohol and other drug use and mobilize communities, especially youth and young adults, to take action. Excuse me. Storytelling can help people understand prevention on both an intellectual as well as an emotional level and see themselves in prevention. These narratives can offer a powerful approach to shifting one's beliefs and behaviors related to substance use and misuse. And we know that sharing stories is a significant way that youth and young adults share information and engage with each other, especially on social media platforms. And finally, we like to tap into the power of storytelling in Communities Talk activities so that we can engage more youth and young adults in prevention. Now, at this point, I'll segue over to Crystal, and Crystal will then segue to Joseph, and I will come back with some closeout and also to do the Q&A. So at this point, I pass the baton to Crystal.
Okay, thank you so much, Marian. So I think that one of the best places to start when we are talking about storytelling, and particularly about storytelling in prevention, is to recognize that each of us are storytellers. Now, this may be surprising because I think when we think about ourselves and we think about our lived experience, we often don't see that the stories in there, right? And the stories that could be really compelling to support an argument or a message point or a campaign or something that you're doing day to day in your job or in your community. We miss the connection. So where I would like to start is to kind of open all of our minds into thinking of ourselves as storytellers. So next slide, please. So we're going to do a little exercise. So what I would like you to do is look around the space that you're in right now, which could be an office, maybe it's a space in your workspace or in your home, or maybe you're in a conference room with some colleagues to participate in this. I want you to look around your space and I just want you to pick one object. Could be anything. Could be the pen you're using to take notes. It could be something that's in, your work bag that's near you, or just something that's sitting around you on your desk. I just want you to pick one thing. I'm going to give you a minute to pick it. Okay. Once you've identified that one thing, I want you to hold it in your hand. I want you to look at that object and ask yourself these following questions. I want you to ask yourself, what does this object make me think or feel? Okay. What does the object remind me of a personal experience or a memory or a decision? What personal story could you share that might be inspired by this object? So I want you to think about those questions. So what does the object make you think or feel? Right? Maybe it's something, it makes you think of something, right? It's connected to a past experience, a memory, a decision you made that was important or significant in your life or in your work. And to think about, is there a story you could tell related to this object? Okay. So I looked around my space, and I always want to give people an example of like how this would work. And I know we all can't share our stories, although I would love to hear them. So the object that's around me are these sets of keys. And yes, I am a Harry Potter fan, so that is a Hufflepuff keychain. But these are my work keys. And when I started my career here at Vanguard, I didn't have as many keys as the keys that are on this key ring. There's maybe like one or two. But as I advanced here and I gained more responsibilities, I was given more keys. And what's significant about the keys that were added to these keychains as I became a leader is that a lot of these keys are connected to taking care of my colleagues. Like one of these keys is related to accessing the emergency box that's here in our workspace, so that if there was an emergency that happens, one of my responsibilities is I need to make sure that everyone gets out of here safely, and I get the information and materials that are in that box to carry it with me so I can take care of my colleagues in this workspace. It's one of my responsibilities as a leader. And so these keys are a great physical reminder to me on a daily basis that while leadership is often tied to ambition or growth or feeling valued and recognized for the contributions that we give and make, it is often associated too with the care of other people, the growing care of other people. And isn't that such a significant component when we think about leadership? Is always thinking as a leader, for all the keys that I have, that I always need to remember that one of my roles is thinking of other people and taking care of the people around me, as well as in addition to all the other expectations related to my job. And I think that's a very powerful way of thinking about our role as we grow in the work that we do, that we never leave people behind. We always remember we have keys and we're responsible for their care as well as our own. So, simple object, right? Keys I use to get into the office, but connects to something very personal, right? A personal philosophy that I have about leadership, right? And I could use that as a way of expressing, you know, some of the tenets I think of inclusive leadership, that concept, and it makes a connection. It gives you a vivid understanding of the message I'm trying to communicate. Next slide. So that's why storytelling can be so effective in the substance use prevention work that you do. The stories will help you make those emotional connections to substance use prevention, right? There's a good chance that whoever you're trying to reach or communicate with might not have a personal connection to substance use misuse issues, right? Maybe they haven't had a relationship with that or knowledge of that. It's not been a part of their lived experience so far. And so using personal stories can help kind of build that emotional connection to that issue. It can help humanize it, right? It brings a human component into the things that we talk about. So especially when we're talking about data and we're talking about trends and all those things, even though it's about people, it doesn't often reflect people. So the personal stories can help elevate that information, elevate those statistics, make those connections to your prevention work by bringing in that human element. They also help create like strong visuals, memorable impressions. Chances are you're going to remember my story about my keys, right? Partly because it was unexpected. It was not necessarily the connection you thought when I raised the keys up to the camera and you saw them. You didn't really know where my story was going, but where I connected it, you're going to remember. It created a visual in your mind, in your memory, and that can be an incredibly powerful tool. They're tools for educating, persuading, affecting support for community prevention efforts. Like, I'm sure that we've all been a part of an event or a meeting where someone shared a personal story or a personal connection to whatever the topic of the conversation was about, and how it could sometimes shift that whole dynamic in that space, that everybody's relating now to the information, to the meeting topic, to the event topic in a different way. Storytelling can do that in substance use prevention conversations as well. And it helps you make a statement about your organization, about what you value, and about the impact you're making or the impact you desire to make. Stories can do that too. Next slide. So the disability rights advocacy movement had this really powerful slogan in the 1970s when they were trying to make the American Disabilities Act happen. And it was nothing about us without us. And some of you participating may have been a part of that movement and know that slogan and heard that slogan. I think it's really, really powerful when thinking about storytelling. Next slide. And the reason for that is that storytelling helps bring the us part of that statement. So nothing about us without us, meaning you can't talk about something that impacts us without inviting the people who are impacted to be a part of the narrative, right? That's what storytelling can do in prevention. It brings the us, right? The people impacted by substance use prevention, the people who benefit from substance use prevention, and the people who do the work of substance use prevention into the conversation. It's our way of bringing in more inclusion and representation, which I know is really important to a lot of organizations now and has been elevated to a key value. Storytelling can be a way of expressing that and demonstrating that value and priority. And the best way to do that is to make sure that we are elevating the storytellers to tell their own story as opposed to us telling the story for them, right? We have to make sure we're not telling stories that aren't our own to tell, and that we're creating safe spaces and opportunities whenever possible for those storytellers to have the platform to be able to share their own stories in their own words and in their own voice, especially if they are identified with underrepresented groups. It's really important. There's a long, long history of people telling those narratives for those groups. And now it's really important that we create the spaces that are safe for people to be able to tell those stories themselves, as opposed to us trying to express it on their behalf. Because we're not going to tell the story accurately, right? The most accurate story is going to come from the actual storyteller who experienced it, the person with the lived experience. And so if we aren't the ones that are the storytellers, then it becomes our responsibility to help find those spaces and platforms. Sometimes they're the ones that we own ourselves or our organizations own ourselves, to give space to amplify those voices, right? To get those identity communities that often people do not make room for, to use our privilege, to use our spaces and resources to give them the platform to speak. And always, it's important to share those stories from spaces of truth and authenticity, right? Often, you know when you've heard a story that just doesn't ring true, right? We've all heard those stories, and it's so much more powerful, even if it is difficult to tell or sometimes difficult to listen to, it's so important to tell stories that come from truth and authenticity, because those are going to be the most powerful narratives that we can share. Next slide. So, what are the clear benefits? Because sometimes organizations and individuals feel uncomfortable with personal storytelling, right? Especially in these conversations when we're talking about issues like substance use prevention, feeling that discomfort. So what are some of the things that we could share to kind of build the argument of why this is an effective tool for us to use in our communications toolkit in prevention? So first, those stories help us build connection and empathy, right? Like we talked about earlier, when they hear a personal story, they can relate on a human level and understand that substance use issues can affect anyone, right? Dispelling the notion that it's an isolated problem, right? It helps people see like the trends. It helps people see that there's a lot of the different ways that it can impact a community, or an individual or a family or an organization. So it builds connection and empathy. It also can help us inspire change, right? So many of us are working in prevention. We have clear call to actions. We have clear things that we are working towards, that we are trying to accomplish, right? Those persuasive stories can help us achieve those actions, can help hopefully inspire people to make those behavior change, to make those support decisions, whatever it is that your call to action is, to help support that. It also can help us address stigma, right? And even though we've come very, very far in this conversation about substance use prevention, there is still a lot of stigma breaking that we need to do. And so the stories help reinforce this is a health issue and help break down some of those community, sometimes cultural barriers, to help promote more compassion, more understanding from the community. So you can also engender more support for the work that you're trying to do at a community level as an individual or as an organization. And then also, we often have difficulty as individuals or organizations in figuring out, how do we communicate our success, right? Because sometimes support gets linked to impact, right? So how do we communicate impact? Using stories and having storytellers with lived experience share those stories can help you tell that success story too. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later, of how in particular that connects to Communities Talk. Next slide. So how do we find the stories, right? So the exercise that I shared at the start, was my way of trying to say all of us have stories, and can use even the most simple ways to find them. But when we're talking about substance use prevention, it's a little bit harder to identify it, right? So here's some steps to take to help you identify, to cultivate those stories, and then support the sharing of those stories in your community. So first, you have to actively listen. And sometimes this can be the hardest step, because we all have, based on our experiences, whether professionally or personally, have our own perspectives of substance use prevention, and have a very strong worldview. And it's really important when we're talking about cultivating stories that we spend more time listening than talking, right? That is what creates a space for people to open up and identify things that are interesting and impactful about how their personal lived experience can connect to the message we're trying to deliver. So first is listening. The second is that sometimes we have to train our staff to learn how to do that kind of listening, right? To learn how to be story collectors, right? And so we need to equip them with the skills to be able to identify what's compelling stories, and then also give them the skills of learning how to help those storytellers develop and feel confident and comfortable in delivering those stories. And this is great that Joseph is joining us, because I think a lot of the work that he does is about helping do exactly that. We'll get to that a little bit later. And then you have to provide support. So this isn't just something that we ask people like, okay, could you please tell this story at the next town hall meeting, and just let people go. We really have to, because they're so personal in nature, when we're talking about substance use prevention, when we're talking about mental health promotion, all of those topics related to behavioral health can be very intimate, difficult to talk about. And so it's really important that we provide the right supports, whether that is through clinical staff, or just the time and space, and allowing that storyteller to determine how much of that story they're comfortable in sharing, and not feeling pressured that they have to tell everything if they're not comfortable sharing everything. So support is a big part of that too. And then it's amplifying voices. So sometimes it's looking in places where people often overlook, and don't give those individuals or identity communities space to share their lived experience, share their own stories, and trying to find stories in those spaces too. And then trying as much as you can to diversify the narrative, and that can be done in so many different ways. Each of us, represent many different identity communities that all intersect to make us who we are. And so diversifying narratives isn't just about having a diverse set of storytellers based on race and ethnicity. It's thinking about those other identity communities too. It's thinking about age. It's thinking about geographic location. It's thinking about education level, all different kinds of components that create diverse perspectives, diverse lived experience that are going to create really impactful stories. Next slide. So where do we find the storytellers, right? Where do we find these compelling storytellers with lived experiences? So here's some ideas of places to look within your organization, within your communities, of where to kind of find these individuals. They could be supporters of your organization, people who have been volunteering to help you. It could be colleagues that work in your organization. It could be family members who've been impacted by substance use and misuse. It could be prevention providers, like colleagues within your community that maybe don't work for your organization, but do similar work for other organizations and in other environments. It could be law enforcement partners. It could be elected government officials and champions, right? It could be, groups of people like parents and caregivers. There's so many support groups in communities. You could find their storytellers there. Faith-based organizations. There's a lot more faith-based organizations who are focusing on this issue and trying to provide their community members with more support and having more open dialogue to kind of break the stigma related to substance use prevention. So there may be some great storytellers in those faith-based spaces as well. Business leaders, thinking about all the people that are connected to this issue, are directly impacted by this issue. Those are all the spaces like K through 12 school educators and administrators. In higher ed, right? College, university students, educators, administrators, healthcare professionals, people in primary care that are also affected by substance use and misuse. So all of these spaces could provide really interesting sources and connections to storytellers that could be a part of the work that you're doing. Next slide. So you've identified the storytellers. They have these, you've helped support them in developing their powerful prevention stories. So how do we connect that into success storytelling, right? So one of the best ways, as Marion had shared earlier, is through the Communities Talk events and activities, which we hope that you will be, if you haven't already participated in, we hope that you and your organization or collection of organizations or communities will get involved. This is a perfect platform to elevate substance use prevention storytelling, right? And so it can be framed as thinking about the challenge, what substance use prevention challenges your community facing, and finding stories connected to that particular challenge. It could be about how the stories relate to solutions, right? Fantastic way to showcase successful solutions that are working in your community to reduce substance use and misuse, right? And using those stories to kind of elevate those solutions. And finally, the stories could be connected to results, right? How does substance use prevention make a difference in your communities? Talking about stories related to the difference that you're making, or stories about the future plans that you have for the community, right? So like maybe the community's talk, events, and activities are related towards working towards a goal. And so what are the stories that you could elevate and amplify that will help express and communicate that future plan? Next slide. So as I mentioned, Communities Talks is a fantastic place, an initiative to use in your community to amplify this prevention storytelling we've been talking about. And, you know, the ways to kind of connect it, and it's always with people's consent, right? Like sometimes people are happy to share a story in like a meeting or like town hall environment, but might feel uncomfortable with it like being shared on your website or shared on social media, or they don't want it recorded. So it's very important to kind of work with the storyteller to figure out their parameters, what makes them feel comfortable, because at the end of the day, you want them to feel safe and you want them to feel comfortable to be able to share and tell their story in the way that they want to share and tell it. And so, you know, once you have that consent, there's lots of channels and opportunities to consider to share that. So like if you have an event or an activity, right, they could be panel members or keynote speakers. It could be at a community health fair or event displays. Oftentimes there's like opening ceremonies where people give opening remarks at a health fair. It's a great time to elevate a prevention story. Through marketing flyers, brochures, and other materials that you might be creating for your organization and your coalition and the other work that you're doing. If you have social media channels, also a fantastic place. You know, I think a lot of people are engaging, particularly on the video related social media channels like Instagram and TikTok. They love content where people are sharing their lived experience and sharing those stories. So that can be fantastic, really impactful, engaging content shared in those spaces. And then just think about what other resources you have available as part of your organization or initiative. Newsletters, blog posts, media pitches, like when you're trying to create stories in your community and have, you know, reporters or media outlets cover it and talk about it. Using those storytellers as part of those interviews and those conversations can be so invaluable. You know, think about website testimonials and videos. At government meetings and hearings, when you're trying to advocate for a specific policy change or a specific plan. And then even like thinking about even more informal settings like community groups and council meetings and events. All of those spaces and channels are opportunities to share storytelling. So something to think about as we continue this conversation. And so at this point, I'd love to throw it over to Joseph, who's going to talk to us about narrative disruption. Joseph?
Hello, friends. Thumbs, I actually don't know who to get. Oh, there I am. Ta-da. Hi, everybody. My name is Joseph Green, and I am excited to be here. I'm going to start with a story. I want you to see me as a father, as a partner, as a person who's in long-term recovery, a person who believes in the power of story to change the world, and someone who has come by this wisdom the hard way. When I was the director of youth programs at a local nonprofit here in the DC area, I had the honor of working with young people to create their stories in the form of spoken word poetry and to create spaces for them to be able to share the spoken word poetry. At our height, we had 36 after-school creative writing programs throughout the DC metropolitan area, and it was enormous, especially, as I'm sure many of you know, when compared to the size of the organization that was running it. My second or third year running the program, we were the host city for what is one of the largest, if not the largest, youth high school level poetry slam, which is a competition where teams come together and compete for trophy, money, things of that sort. And so we were a really big part of bringing that event to the DC metropolitan area. And it was, you know, as any giant event can be, unruly, everything going on behind the curtains, trying to make sure that we were, you know, getting everyone there on time, that we were good with all the venues. And our final venue was the Kennedy Center. If you're not from this area, the Kennedy Center is a very big deal in the DC metropolitan area. It has, you know, the prestige of being the Kennedy Center, and then the space and the funding and the support. So when you do make a relationship with them, you want to, you know, show up with your best suit on. That being said, the final event was held at the Kennedy Center, and our local team, the team from my organization, didn't make it into the finals, but because we were the host team, they got to go up on stage and do a poem before everybody else showed up. Excuse me, before everyone else competed. But instead of doing a poem, they did a protest. And so I just want to set the stage for you. We're in the orchestra at the Kennedy Center, and I'm up in the high seats, and beside me are the organizers of the giant festival, sponsors, some famous people, and it was the press. And I'm sitting here, and my team goes on stage, and instead of doing a poem, they say, actually, we're going to shut this down because we need to have a conversation, and we believe this is the only way you were going to listen to us. Now you can imagine that at first my heart sank. I'm very nervous. What are these young people going to say? I thought we were doing a good job. This event was beautiful. We had the press out, we had cameras, we had famous people. Daveed Diggs was like the host of the event. It was a big deal. They, the young people, felt as if we, the adults, had betrayed their trust, that we had lost sight of what the event was actually supposed to be about. And instead of making it fully accessible, instead of being concerned about the heat of the summer and them traveling around, instead of making sure that coaches were encouraging young people to build connectivity as opposed to being competitive, and most importantly, there was a lack of mental health services available for these young people who were telling really traumatic stories on stage and having those judged and then clapped for or not clapped for. And they felt that it was time for a reckoning. In that moment, it took me maybe 2 or 3 minutes to realize that what was actually happening was, this is what we taught them. This is the world that they wanted to create, and we had been giving them the power to use their words to represent themselves, to win competitions, but now they were actually using it to make the world, their world, a better place. And so I went immediately from horrified to extraordinarily proud. And what I learned from that is, you can't just extract from people. Also, you can't just use people's stories and the trauma of their stories to bring attention to a cause without making sure that you are teaching them how to use stories to see the light in the world, to see the joy in their life, to see their natural leadership skills, to see that they have other things going for them aside from the things that we tend to gravitate towards because they sell, because they get the ooze, because they get funders to pay attention. And that is directly why I do the work that I do now and why I do it the way that I do it. I've seen, and myself as a person in recovery who is vocal and is out in the world, I myself have had my story taken and used in a way that does not make me feel good, and I believe does not progress the issues that I truly want to progress. But they got people to tune into the news, or or bring me in as a speaker. And so I start this small time that we have together with that story, because I want you to see the value for me in all of this is making sure that we take our stories and use our stories for good, but that we also make sure that the return on investment is 360 degrees for everybody that's involved. And so when we came up with narrative disruption, which was in next slide, please. When we came up with narrative disruption, which was formed out of public narrative, which is a form of storytelling for advocacy that comes out of Harvard University, started by a gentleman named Marshall Gantz. I worked with one of his students, a young lady named Rosie Greenberg, and together we came up with this idea of narrative disruption, where we saw a need for value-centered storytelling, but with a more trauma-informed way of doing it, especially when dealing with people inside of the recovery community and youth inside of the prevention movement, and also for people who work in these spaces to be able to tell a version of their story that brings people together without necessarily putting themselves out there in a way that could be damaging to their career or sharing parts of their life that they're not comfortable sharing. So you see the definition up here is narrative disruption is the craft of personal, organizational, and social transformation through stories of lived experience. But I want to add something to that. Narrative disruption, the main narrative that it is disrupting is the idea that we have to tell painful stories to make meaningful change. And so as you will tell as we go through this really concise presentation of what the full training is, the idea behind it is we can connect on values and things that we believe in. And that actually broadens our community, especially when we enter spaces where people don't have the same shared lived experience as we do. Next slide. So we do a thing called value-centered storytelling. I'll give you the definition of that after we discuss quickly the definition of values. You can see here, I'm going to read it out loud for you and just add some of my own flavor to it. But values are the fundamental principles and standards that guide and motivate our behavior and our choices of what is important in life. Pause there for a moment. The idea that my values motivate the decisions that I make and the behaviors that I choose in life, the idea that that is true is the center of how we can make connection with other people who don't come from where we come from and may not see the world the same way that we see it. And what I mean by that is, if I am motivated by family, I am motivated, I have 2 sons, and I am motivated by family. And I come from Northern Virginia, and you come from California, and you were raised in a very wealthy neighborhood, and I was raised in one not so wealthy. And I'm a person in long-term recovery, so I have lived experience with active drug addiction, and you do not. The fact that we both value family and the story and context around why we value family, and the fact that valuing our family is our motivation for doing the work that we do, that has a greater chance of creating connection than does me telling you the story of my active addiction or the ruin that came from that space. Living in sync with one's values promotes purpose, meaning, and alignment. Living out of sync with one's values can be a source of stress and anxiety and lead to health issues. Living in harmony, one values fosters a healthy and purposeful life. When I say that storytelling should have a 360 ROI, this is what I mean. The stories that we cultivate, whether it be with the people that we're serving, or within the organizations themselves, they help us align our values and to understand why the people we work with are motivated to do the work that they do. It also gives us the gift of seeing our own life in story and understanding that we have, no matter what it is we do or what our background is, an infinite amount of stories and ways to connect with our community and with the people around us. And even if people come into a training with me, even if they never use their stories for advocacy or out in the world, the gift of that itself is super important for me. And I think for everybody to be able to know that no matter their background, that they have the ability to become the primary authors of their future and of their own character. And this also is true for the organizations that take the training and do storytelling as a culture, as opposed to something that they do every once in a while or at a webinar once a year. When organizations are able to tell their story, people see them for the value that they offer the community and not just for what they are asking for, whether it be funding or volunteership, so on and so forth. And you can use the stories of the people who work there and their motivations to create greater communities and networks of understanding and constituencies that will show up because they feel connected to the people, not just the cause. Next slide. Value-centered storytelling, centering universal values to create authentic connections between groups or individuals with differing identities. Kind of already went over this, but what I'm going to say here, what we do in our training and what I think you can do in any sort of training, because you can find exercises on how to center values and how to understand values pretty much anywhere on the internet. But we use a system called the R1 card learning system. And in that, when we engage audiences, they are introduced to 57 different values and they're categorized. And what this does, and what I think is very important, it offers people a new language with which to express themselves. And when you do this in a group of people and they're all looking at the same words and they're learning from the same deck of cards or the same definitions, it's a way for us to create a new type of understanding, because sometimes a person says freedom and it means one thing to them, and another person says, well, I value freedom, and it means something else to them. But when I tell you the story attached to why I value freedom, you can get the context, and now we understand each other in a more meaningful way. And so the part of the exercise that we do leads people to summing up those 57 values down to 10, and then using those 10 as a way to break into telling their stories. Because one of the things that I've noticed as someone who has been a creative writing facilitator for many years is that when you tell someone to tell me a story, most people go blank. And so these exercises, not only do they help with the centering of values and understanding what values are, but it helps give people a starting point. It's a very rich prompt, as opposed to some other prompts that may just get you into the room, but they don't really lead you in a particular direction. Next slide. So here you see, and if you want to make it a little bigger on your screen by using the little line in between me and this slide, you can make this slide a little bigger if the letters are small. But this is the basic structure of a narrative disruption story. And the structure is important because it's not just for prevention. It can be used in prevention. It can be used in recovery. It can be used in pretty much any space where people are trying to advocate or bring awareness or create connection. But the structure, if you master the structure, then you can put many stories into it and continue to use this throughout your life, throughout your career. But it first starts with a declaration of self. If you go back to the story that I told at the beginning, I told you I wanted you to see me as. This aspect of narrative disruption started with the fact that I am a person in long-term recovery. And many times when we introduce ourselves as people in long-term recovery. And if you are a person in long-term recovery or love someone or work in the space, you understand what that means. But if you're not, then that statement, your opening statement, can be the beginning of creating a chasm between you and the people that you're speaking to. So choosing based on your audience and based on the part of your identity that you are comfortable sharing. I like to say, I am a father, I'm a partner, I'm a narrative disruptor, I am the son of Henry and Helen Green, I am a citizen, depending on the audience that I'm speaking to. I like to set the stage declaring who it is I am and how I want you to see me in this space. The next is a moment explored. A lot of times, and this is something that happens when I first go into a space, the first thing we have to clear up is, what is a story? And we can start by saying something that has a beginning, a middle, and end. But a lot of times when you ask somebody their story, they try to fit all of who they are as a sequence of events into whatever time frame you give them. And what we have found is it is way more effective to isolate and speak specifically about a moment and to invite people into that moment using all of the sensory details that we learned when we were in high school. What did it look like? What did it smell like? What did it feel like? Inviting that person or persons into that space creates a level of vulnerability and intimacy that you don't get when you're just making an announcement about what the work is your organization does or what your job is at your organization. It's the difference between sharing your resume and talking about the story of your first day at work, right? And when you allow people to come in, it creates a different level of trust as opposed to what they gather by just understanding on an intellectual level what it is you're discussing. So the vulnerability is in the details. And then a value shared, a lesson learned, and a path chosen. And yes, okay, I see questions coming up and I will answer those questions but yes, I will share these slides. Your story offers connection through value. What value are you sharing? And being clear about that value. When I start my workshops, I tell a story and then I ask people, can you tell me what it is that I value from this story? If your audience, if your funders, if your constituents, if your young people know what it is you value, and they can relate that to something that they value, there again is a greater connection and a greater chance of them doing whatever it is you're going to be asking them to do later on in the conversation. If you are going in, you're a preventionist and you're trying to get young people to sign on to doing a program, the program may be cool, the graphics may be great, the celebrity that you got to do the soundbite may be awesome, but you're in the room and you're asking them something. And if you can't create a sense of vulnerability that they can connect to, it is not likely that they're going to be able to participate in that at any level past surface. So what is the value that you are connecting with, and how does your story share that value? When you're using your story for advocacy or to bring awareness about an issue, the next thing to do is to speak about what it is you are talking about in color, which means this is the time for you to share how the value that you have is going to affect the thing that you care about in the world and want to change. So if you're going in and you're speaking to young people and you want to talk about prevention and how this particular prevention work is going to change something, being able to talk about how that value, why you do what you do, and why you are what you are asking them to do is going to directly make change in the world and the thing that it's working on in detail. Again, with sensory, you have an opportunity to really make it come alive for them and to then engage them in conversation about the things that they see in the world and that they want to make a difference in. Which leads us into the next section would be the world we see versus the world we dream. Again, this is another storytelling tool that when you're using it all together in one story, this is a way for us to close out on a positive note. And that is with showing what it is we see that we want to change. For instance, in my story, I saw a world where young people were receiving services but feeling exploited. And in the world I dream is a world where they were actually doing what they were doing, which was stepping up and using their voice to make change. And the next step would be for adults to listen to the change that young people are saying. So if I were to continue that story and use it for advocacy, I would talk about how the most important part of this is young people speaking, but also the people they trust listening. And then always ending with something tangible. This is what we can do. Here's the phone number to call. Here's the action to show up at. Here's the meeting. Here's where we're meeting. Here's the petition. Always ending with something that brings an action that shows some level of commitment on the other half of the people who are hearing this story. Whether, again, you're signing young people up for a program or you're trying to get volunteers or raise funds, as it were. Next slide, please. And a friendly time check, just so I know that I'm on point here. Can anyone jump on and tell me how many minutes I have or don't have left?
You have about 10 minutes, Joseph.
Oh, brilliant. Cool. So this structure right here is basically what I said in the other slide, but broken down and how we do it again in the workshop. It gives people an opportunity to see it in front of them and fill it out. I'm going to take you through this based on the story that I told earlier. And then, of course, there'll be some Q&A and time for questions afterwards. So if you want to ask me, I'm here to listen. Hello, my name is Joseph Green. I want you to see me as a father, when I was in charge of, so a specific time in my life, a specific time in your life, when I was the head of this organization, this story happened in this particular order. This is what I learned from it. And it's okay if it's not directly associated with the topic that you're there to speak about. And I'll show you what I mean. From this, I learned how important it is. You're welcome, Sarah. How important it is to listen to young people and to create spaces where young people can be heard. This is why I do the work that I do. So in 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, however much time you have, you've established a personal story. You've shared a lesson, which is a gift, and you discussed why it affects who you are. Now, as I said, I'm a person in long-term recovery. I do these stories a lot when I am advocating for recovery, but I can take this same story and share about how it affects recovery without having to talk about any of the negative aspects of my personal recovery. Next slide, please. So in public narrative, you take the story of self and then you move it to the story of us. So you are talking about your personal journey and then you are connecting it to other people's personal journey. So I would go from, this is why I have spent so much time telling stories and learning how to tell stories in a way that is safe for the storyteller, but also extraordinarily effective for the cause that they're fighting for. And I know you also care about protecting young people while also teaching them the courage they're going to need to survive and the protective factors that they need to survive in this world, because you are a teacher, you are a counselor, you are a parent, you are a member of our community. Right now, we're facing a problem where young people, especially post-pandemic, are pulling back and they're spending more time with their technology and more time away from creating connection with other humans. And we know that part of being effective in prevention is teaching young people how to advocate for themselves, teaching them the power and importance of their own autonomy, but also giving them the tools to keep and create connection. So we must lead by example. We must learn how to use our stories to connect with young people and to create time to show them how to cultivate their own stories, not only because that's important, but that commitment of time is showing them in action how important this is, taking a little bit away from the academia of life and really giving to the spiritual and emotional side of life. If we don't, in the world I see, young people are going to keep growing further and further apart. And no matter how much funding we throw at it, if we can't get young people to be able to connect with each other and connect with us, we're not going to get the results that we need. And I know this firsthand because I grew up in a family where emotions were not shared and stories were not shared. And it ended up in me leaning into a space, looking for solutions, looking for the wrong answer, and ending up with a substance use disorder. But if we do, then we have an opportunity to really capitalize on the good work that we've already started and making this world as they would have it be by listening, creating intergenerational conversation. So join me by doing whatever that may be. In this particular case, if I'm talking to a room full of adults, I challenge you to take another storytelling workshop, to go online and listen to The Moth, to find a way to share a story with someone in your life to create greater connection. All right, last slide. Here you will find my name, website, and email and social media. If you are interested in learning more about what we do, we have a lot of videos from the organizations we've already done this work with. We've worked with Faces and Voices of Recovery, Mobilize, SAMHSA, and many others at this point. So if you would like to know more about this type of storytelling, like I think my predecessor did a very great job of explaining why stories are important, all the places you can use stories and find stories. This was a more specific way of telling a story, obviously not the only way, but yeah, if you want to know more, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Okay, that's my time.
Wow. So thanks so much to Crystal and Joseph. Now it is the Q&A period. And I'll just say again, please type in any questions into the chat box and we'll address those questions that we have already. I also just wanted to let participants know that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to SAMHSA's YouTube channel for on-demand viewing. We typically don't share the slide deck, but we share the recording so participants can view the slides. So the first question I'm going to shoot over to you, Joseph. And that question is, Joseph, how can storytelling create empathy and engagement within the community regarding substance use issues?
I think that there are so many issues that we are dealing with in the world at any given time. I know as someone who works in a multitude of spaces that there are a lot of really important things that people are trying to get help to fix. One of the ways to create a almost instant sense of empathy and connection and de-othering is by telling stories that connect people, as I was saying in my presentation, at a level that's different than just the lived experience that the individual who may be sharing the story has. And so if you are connecting with people on values, on emotions, these are things that are universal. And once that connection is made, you have humanized that person in a way that was not present before. And so if that person also has a substance use disorder or also works in the field and people have, you know, a cursory knowledge of what that means, what you're basically saying is that these are people too. They are in your community, and together we can work to make our values real in the world, because I know you value this, and now you know I value it because of the story I just told you.
Great. Thanks, Joseph. This question is for Crystal. What are some effective ways to ensure that stories resonate with diverse community members?
That's a great question. And it has a very simple answer. You have to ask them. I think so often we make assumptions about what we think people need to hear. Um, and I love this example and the story that Joseph shared about the young people that he worked with and them kind of taking the moment to take the stage to hold account and to communicate what was important to them, what they needed, right? But the truth is, they shouldn't have had to do that. Like, we should have been doing a better job. And now we know from that experience to know to do that, to be creating the conversations and the spaces to to explore what their needs might be, to explore what those challenges might be. What is it that they want to hear more from, right? Do they want to hear from somebody that's a peer? Do they want to hear from somebody who has more experience, you know, or that comes from a specific community or organization? So just having those just basic starting conversations with the community specifically you're trying to engage, to get a better understanding of, to Joseph's point, what they value, what's important to them. And then use that information to cultivate, okay, what are the stories that are going to be of most value to them? What are the storytellers who are going to be the most impactful or engaging, or the people they're going to be able to connect to because of those shared values, maybe shared culture, all those kind of shared connections. It's really about having a conversation. And I'm always amazed at how often individuals and organizations don't start there. They always start with what they think they know and then make decisions from there. And where we really need to start is we need to start directly by having direct conversations, bringing them, those communities, into the work with us so that we can better make and build those connections.
Great. Thanks, Crystal. So well, Austin, thanks for the question. He says it's to everyone, but I'm going to shoot this one to Joseph and Crystal. If you want to jump in, please do so. But Austin's question is, what are the advantages, disadvantages, or overlap of story versus spoken word poetry?
So two things. I'll speak as a facilitator of both storytelling and spoken word workshops, and as someone who pretty much refuses to do a spoken word poem now if I'm not allowed to also tell a story. And I would say, from the facilitating point of view, I think that people are more comfortable with telling stories. They understand that concept better. I think spoken word is a form of storytelling, can be a form of storytelling. And for a long time, as a creative writing teaching artist, I went into schools and I facilitated thousands of workshops with young people. And I would say, because the expectation was the poetry guy was coming in, it was a little easier. But when you're in like a professional space, or you're working with a community where there could be differences in education level or other capacities, the idea of telling a story, I think, is just a lot easier to wrap your mind around. And one of the things I do, very similar to Crystal's exercise, I go in, and one of the first things we do, our warm up, is tell me a story. Tell me about a time where someone did something kind for you, right? And there's a who, what, when, where. Why do you think the person did it? How did it make you feel? but it's a really simple structure. And then when people kind of get used to that idea, they realize that, oh, actually every day there's a story. There was a story about how I woke up this morning. There's a story about how I got to school. There's a story about why my son made me late. There's so many different stories. And these little stories are the things that most people have in common. And so being able to tell those stories in a very simple way is a great way to make connection with folks. And then I think I actually answered my own question as to why I do it the other way. Now, spoken word is great. It's flashy. And if you're really good at it, it can stir up emotions. But my goal is not to be the best spoken word artist in the world. My goal is to be the best connector of humans. And sometimes you need a story to do that, where something as specific as spoken word will not be successful.
Great. Thanks, Joseph. Crystal, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, the only thing, that's such a great answer. The only thing I would add to it is I think sometimes we get real hung up on formats of things and the structures of things. And I know for me personally, some of the most memorable, compelling, moving stories I've heard in my life was just somebody talking to me and talking and sharing from their own truth, from an authentic, honest space. And it didn't need a lot of flash in order to move me to feel differently about what it was that they were sharing with me. And I think that's important for us to keep in mind, because I think there's a lot of bells and whistles that we can add to things in a way that we tell and share information. And for experienced storytellers, that may be totally fine, right? But I think the most compelling story is always going to be the one that just comes straight from someone's heart, straight from someone's soul, just communicating. And it doesn't need a lot of structure and format if it's coming from a place of honesty.
Great. Thanks, Crystal. And Austin, again, thanks for a great question. I'm scanning the chat box, don't see anything, but I do have a question that I would like to ask both of you. And that question is, if you have one tip for substance use prevention storytellers, what would it be? I'll tell you, I'm being slightly selfish here because I want to help the communities talk people who are writing their stories to get their juices flowing, and that one tip could be so helpful.
Would you like to go first, Crystal?
Sure, I'll start. I was like waiting because I hadn't had my answer, and then it just came to me. So I think the most important thing for me is listening. I think we don't create enough spaces for listening, and we do a lot of talking. And while we may come from experiences or positions which we have a perspective and we have something of value to offer, I'm not belittling that at all, but we need to also create spaces for other voices and other lived experiences. And the way to do that is being an active, open listener. And to start those dialogues and start those connections by listening more and talking less.
Okay.
And I would say more important than knowing what we are fighting against is knowing what we are fighting for. And to not center the harm, but to center the love and the joy and the world that we are trying to create, and to highlight the beauty and the love and the joy that's already existing in the world that we're in as our motivation. I think it gets people further. I think the other side is a little too easy, but we tend to lean ourselves to that. So as you're looking for stories and encouraging people to share their stories, encourage them to share the light and the love and the hope also.
Great. I'm still checking the chat box. I don't see any new questions. I'm going to pause just for a second. Okay, so at this point, I'll say that that was a great Q&A session, and this slide, I just want to say it's important to share your story because doing so inspires others. It elevates your prevention expertise within your community. It creates opportunities to participate in the national prevention effort and provides a roadmap for other communities who are just beginning their prevention story. And also, SAMHSA listens to your stories to help plan the future of Communities Talk. So shameless plug, guys. Please visit stopalcoholabuse.gov/Communities Talk to learn more. Next slide. And we don't ask you to do this on your own. We create some tools and resources for you. We have a prevention podcast series featuring participants from previous Communities Talk cycles, success stories from communities across the country. Who knows, you may go to that site and see your local community highlighted. And also we have the What's New article that help event organizers plan, host, and evaluate their events. So to see more, to see all of this rather, visit the Communities Talk website, which again is stopalcoholabuse.gov Communities Talk. Next slide. Oh, next slide is our information. Storytelling is, can be a never-ending conversation. So our information is listed here. Please feel free to reach out to Crystal, Joseph, or me. And for those of you who do plan to participate in Communities Talk 2024, we look forward to hearing those stories and sharing them. And we hope that you feel inspired to share your prevention story because they are important. Again, thank you for your time. Great conversations, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.